He was gone for 3 years, but that morning, the gate he once walked through opened again. The early morning fog rested quietly over Camp Pendleton, California, covering the Marine base in a soft gray blanket. The air carried the familiar scent of salt from the Pacific Ocean, cold metal from the training grounds, and fresh coffee drifting from the barracks where young Marines began another day of duty. Everything looked the same. The rows of buildings, the American flags moving gently in the coastal wind, the sound of boots crossing the pavement. But something impossible was about to happen. At exactly 6:17 a.m., a figure appeared near the main entrance. Not a soldier, not a visitor, a dog. A large white German Shepherd K9 stood just beyond the gate, his paws dusty from miles of travel, his once bright coat marked by the quiet evidence of a long journey. His ears lifted as he looked toward the familiar buildings. His amber eyes searched the place as if he was looking for a memory that never faded. The young Marine guarding the entrance slowly stepped forward. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered. The dog did not move away. He simply lowered his head and looked past him, deeper into the base. Around his neck was an old leather collar, worn from time and weather. Hanging from it was a small metal tag that caught the morning light. The Marine reached for his radio, but he stopped when the dog took 3 slow steps forward. Not toward food, not toward shelter, toward home. 3 years earlier, everyone believed this K9 had disappeared forever. His name was Ghost, and once he belonged beside one man who trusted him with everything. Sergeant Elijah Carter had been one of the most respected K9 handlers in his unit. A black U.S. Marine known for his calm voice, steady hands, and the way he treated every animal under his care like a partner, not a tool. Elijah always said a good K9 did not just follow commands. A good K9 listened to the things people could not say. Ghost was different from the beginning. While other dogs rushed ahead, Ghost watched. He studied. He understood. His white coat made him stand out among the other working dogs, but it was his loyalty that made people remember him. The two were inseparable. During long training days beneath the California sun, Ghost waited beside Elijah's boots. During quiet evenings after duty, Elijah would sit outside the barracks with a cup of coffee while Ghost rested beside him, his head against Elijah's leg. They did not need many words. They understood each other in silence. Then came the day that changed everything. A mission ended, and Ghost was gone. No clear answers. No goodbye. Just an empty space where a partner used to be. Elijah returned, but a part of him never truly came home. He left the K9 program months later, carrying the memory of a dog he believed he had failed. Years passed. The base changed. New Marines arrived. New stories replaced old ones. But some people never forgot Ghost. Especially Elijah. Every year, he returned to the same training field where they spent countless hours together. He would stand quietly beneath the California sky, holding the old leash that no longer had a purpose. He never admitted it out loud, but he always hoped. Maybe somewhere, somehow, Ghost was still searching. That morning, Elijah was walking across the base when his phone rang. The message was simple. "Sergeant Carter, you need to come to the front gate." He expected paperwork. He expected another routine request. He did not expect to see a white German Shepherd standing in the sunlight. For a moment, Elijah stopped breathing. The world around him became quiet. The footsteps disappeared. The voices faded. All he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. Ghost lifted his head. The old K9 looked at the man standing across from him. 3 years had passed. Seasons had changed. Roads had separated them. But some memories are not stored in calendars. They are carried somewhere deeper. Ghost slowly walked forward, one step at a time, as if following a path only he could see. And around his neck was the message that would reveal why he had finally come home. The morning sun had barely touched the rooftops of Camp Pendleton when Sergeant Elijah Carter arrived at the front gate, still unsure why he had been called there. The message from the guard had been short. "Come to the entrance. There is something you need to see." For a man who had spent years learning not to expect miracles, Elijah felt something inside him hesitate. He had learned that hope could be dangerous when it was built on something you could not hold. But the moment he stepped onto the pavement and saw the white German Shepherd standing near the gate, every wall he had built around his heart began to crack. Ghost stood quietly beneath the California morning light. The same strong posture, the same watchful eyes, the same small tilt of his head whenever he studied someone he trusted. But there was something different too. 3 years had passed. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of wondering if the last memory he carried was also the final one. Elijah did not rush toward him. He simply stood there, letting the moment exist. Around them, the Marines at the gate watched in silence. Some had heard stories about Ghost. Others had only seen the old photographs hanging inside the K-9 training building. But none of them had ever seen the bond that existed between a soldier and the dog who once walked beside him. Elijah slowly lowered himself to one knee. His uniform was clean, his posture still disciplined, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had been waiting longer than he ever admitted. "Ghost," he whispered. The K-9 did not move immediately. He watched Elijah carefully. The wind moved through the base, carrying the distant sound of morning drills and the quiet rhythm of another day beginning. Then Ghost stepped forward. One step, then another. His nose moved closer to Elijah's hand, searching through years of memories hidden inside a familiar scent. Elijah stayed still. He knew better than anyone that trust was never forced. It was earned. Ghost finally touched his nose against Elijah's palm. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then the old K-9 lowered his head, resting it gently against the Marine's hand the way he had done countless times before. Elijah closed his eyes. The emotion he had carried silently for years finally had somewhere to go. "I thought I lost you," he said softly. The words were not meant for anyone else. They were only for Ghost. The dog remained beside him, calm and steady, just like before. The other Marines looked away, giving them a private moment without saying a word. Some reunions do not need an audience. They only need two souls that remember. Later that morning, Ghost was brought into the K-9 facility for a careful examination. The younger Marines moved around him with curiosity and respect. They checked his identification records, his collar, and the small metal tag that had traveled with him across unknown roads. The collar was old. The leather was faded, but it had been protected carefully, almost like someone knew it carried something important. Elijah stood nearby, watching every movement. He noticed the small details. The way Ghost looked toward him whenever someone entered the room. The way the dog relaxed when he heard Elijah's voice. The way a simple command from years ago still connected them. It was not training anymore. It was memory. Captain Nathan Brooks, the officer overseeing the K-9 unit, looked at the collar with a thoughtful expression. "This was not something he found by accident," he said quietly. Elijah looked at him. "What do you mean?" Captain Brooks carefully turned the metal tag over in his hand. There was a small section on the back that no one had noticed before. A hidden compartment. Something had been placed inside and sealed away for a long time. The room became silent. Ghost sat beside Elijah, watching as the old collar was examined. The answer they had been searching for was not in a report. It was not in a database. It was carried by the one partner who never stopped trying to return home. Elijah looked down at Ghost and gently touched the top of his head. For 3 years, he believed he was the one waiting for the dog to come back. But standing there in that quiet room, he began to understand something different. Maybe Ghost had been searching too. Maybe loyalty was never about staying in one place. Maybe loyalty was about finding the way back, no matter how long the journey took. The room remained silent as Captain Nathan Brooks carefully examined the old leather collar resting beneath the soft lights of the K-9 facility. For 3 years, that small piece of equipment had traveled through unknown places, carrying a secret no one understood. Now, after all that time, it had returned with the one companion who never forgot where he belonged. Sergeant Elijah Carter stood beside Ghost, watching every movement with quiet attention. The Marine had spent years learning how to stay calm in difficult moments, but this was different. This was not a mission. This was not a command. This was a memory standing right in front of him. Ghost sat beside his boots, his white fur glowing under the warm overhead lights. The old K-9 looked peaceful, almost as if he knew that the hardest part of the journey was finally over. Captain Brooks carefully opened the hidden compartment inside the metal tag. Inside was a small folded piece of paper, protected by a thin layer of material that kept it safe through time and weather. Everyone in the room leaned closer, but Elijah stayed still. Something about that message felt bigger than curiosity. It felt like a piece of the past waiting to speak. Captain Brooks slowly unfolded the note. The handwriting was faded, but the words were clear. "If Ghost finds his way back, please tell Sergeant Carter that he was never forgotten." Elijah lowered his eyes. He recognized the meaning before he even heard the rest. The message was not about a dog. It was about a promise. A promise that someone had believed Ghost would return. A promise that someone knew the bond between a Marine and his K9 was something time could not erase. Ghost looked up at Elijah, his amber eyes steady and familiar. The Marine gently placed his hand on the dog's shoulder. Years earlier, before the distance and silence, their story had started in a much simpler place. It was a quiet morning at the K9 training grounds. Elijah had been assigned to work with a young German shepherd that many people considered unusual. Ghost was intelligent, but he was different. He did not rush toward new situations. He observed first. He listened. He waited. Some trainers thought he needed more confidence. Elijah saw something else. He saw patience. He saw awareness. He saw a partner who understood the world in his own way. Their connection did not happen in one day. It grew through small moments. Early mornings before sunrise. Long walks across the training field. Quiet afternoons where Elijah would sit beneath the shade of a tree while Ghost rested nearby. The Marine carried memories from his years of service that he rarely shared with others. He had learned how to be strong for everyone around him. But Ghost seemed to notice the moments when strength became heavy. The dog never asked questions. He simply stayed. And sometimes, staying was the greatest form of support. The bond between them became something everyone at the base recognized. When Elijah walked across the grounds, Ghost was always beside him. When Elijah prepared for training, Ghost watched every movement. They became more than handler and K9. They became family. But life has a way of changing even the strongest connections. One day, their routine was interrupted. A mission separated them, and when Elijah returned, Ghost was nowhere to be found. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Search efforts continued, but eventually the world moved forward. People told Elijah that he needed to accept that some things were never coming back. He tried. He truly tried. But every time he heard a dog bark in the distance, every time he saw a white coat passing by, a small part of him wondered, what if? Now, standing inside the K9 facility, Elijah finally had his answer. Ghost had not forgotten. The journey had not erased the memories. The years had not changed the bond they created. Captain Brooks looked at Elijah and placed the message back beside the collar. He carried this all the way home, he said quietly. Elijah looked down at Ghost. The K9 slowly leaned against him, just like he used to. The same gesture, the same trust. A simple reminder that some connections are not measured by time or distance. They are measured by the heart. And in that quiet room on a Marine base beside the California coast, two old partners began writing the next chapter of a story that had never truly ended. The hidden message remained on the table long after everyone in the K9 facility had stopped speaking. The morning light moved slowly across the room, touching the old collar, the faded leather, and the white German shepherd sitting quietly beside Sergeant Elijah Carter. But the words inside that small metal tag had opened a door to a memory that Elijah had spent years trying to close. Someone had believed Ghost would return. Someone had protected the promise that brought them back together. And now, Elijah needed to understand the final piece of the story. Captain Nathan Brooks carefully placed the collar beside the old training records stored in the facility. There is something else you should see, he said. Elijah looked toward him. Something else? Captain Brooks nodded. He walked to a shelf filled with photographs and documents from the K9 unit's history. Among the pictures were generations of working dogs and their handlers, each pair carrying a story of trust and dedication. He stopped at an older photograph. There was Elijah, younger, standing beside Ghost on a bright California afternoon. The dog looked proud. Elijah looked different. Not just younger, but lighter. Before the years of waiting. Before the unanswered questions. Ghost was always searching for you, Captain Brooks said softly. Elijah looked down at the floor. How could he remember after all this time? Captain Brooks smiled slightly. Because you gave him something worth remembering. The word stayed with Elijah. He thought about all the small moments people never saw. The quiet walks after training. The way Ghost would wait outside the office door. The way the K9 would look back whenever Elijah walked away, making sure his partner was still there. Their bond was never built on one great moment. It was built on thousands of small ones. Moments that seemed ordinary at the time, but became priceless years later. Ghost lifted his head when Elijah moved closer. The Marine placed his hand gently on the dog's white fur. He noticed the small details he remembered, the way Ghost tilted his head when listening, the way his ears moved toward every sound, the calm expression that always made Elijah feel like everything would be okay. 3 years earlier, Elijah had believed losing Ghost meant losing the final connection to that chapter of his life. He had walked away from the K-9 program because every training field reminded him of what was missing. He told himself that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But Ghost's return showed him something different. Sometimes the past does not come back to hold you. Sometimes it comes back to heal you. Later that afternoon, Elijah walked with Ghost across the same training field where they had spent countless hours together. The California sun warmed the ground beneath their feet. The ocean breeze moved through the nearby trees, carrying the familiar sounds of Camp Pendleton. Marines continued their daily routines around them, but for Elijah, everything felt slower. Ghost walked beside him like no time had passed. The same pace, the same quiet confidence, the same connection. Elijah stopped near the edge of the field and looked toward the horizon. "You really came back," he whispered. Ghost looked up at him. No words were needed. Across the base, some of the younger Marines watched the two of them walk together. They saw a K-9 and a Marine. But those who understood the story saw something deeper. They saw a promise that survived distance. They saw loyalty that waited patiently. They saw proof that some bonds are not broken when people are separated. They simply become stronger in silence. As the afternoon faded into evening, Elijah returned to the K-9 facility with Ghost beside him. The old collar remained carefully stored, but now it was no longer a reminder of loss. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even when a chapter feels unfinished, the story may still be waiting for the right moment to continue. And for the first time in years, Elijah no longer felt like someone searching for what he had lost. He felt like someone who had finally found his way home. The evening air settled gently over Camp Pendleton, California, as Sergeant Elijah Carter sat outside the K-9 facility with Ghost resting beside him. The sounds of the base continued around them. Boots moving across pavement. Vehicles passing in the distance. Voices of Marines preparing for another day. But for Elijah, the world felt strangely quiet. After 3 years of uncertainty, he finally had his partner back. Yet one question remained in his mind. Where had Ghost been all this time? The old collar resting inside the facility carried the answer, but the truth was still waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, Captain Nathan Brooks gathered a small team inside the K-9 records room. Sunlight entered through the windows, creating soft, golden lines across shelves filled with old files and photographs. Ghost sat near Elijah, calm and alert, as if he understood that something important was about to happen. Captain Brooks placed the collar on the table. "We checked every record we could find," he said. But Ghost was not officially listed with any unit after the day he disappeared. Elijah looked at the collar. Then how did he survive? Captain Brooks paused. "That is the question we need to answer." The team began examining the details carefully. The collar showed signs of a long journey, but it also showed something else. Someone had taken care of it. Someone had protected the message inside. This was not a random object left behind. It was something carried with purpose. Ghost watched quietly from beside Elijah. Every few moments, his eyes moved toward the collar, then back to his handler. It was almost as if the dog knew the story was finally being told. Captain Brooks opened an old archive from 3 years earlier. Inside were reports from the time Ghost went missing. The pages contained the last known details about the mission, but one small note caught Elijah's attention. It was written by another Marine who had been part of the same unit. The note mentioned that Ghost had followed a familiar scent after the team separated. Elijah read the words slowly. He understood what they meant. Ghost had not simply wandered away. He had been trying to complete something. The Marine placed the paper down and looked at his partner. "You were still looking for me, weren't you?" he whispered. Ghost lowered his head gently, staying close. The room became silent. Everyone there understood that this was more than a story about a dog returning home. It was about a promise that had survived time. Later that day, Elijah walked with Ghost along the old training path behind the K-9 facility. The same path where they had spent countless mornings learning each other's habits. The trees moved softly in the coastal breeze. The smell of the ocean mixed with the familiar scent of the training grounds. Elijah remembered the first day Ghost arrived. Many people saw a young K-9 that needed more patience. Elijah saw potential. He saw a partner waiting for someone to believe in him. That belief changed both of their lives. Ghost had helped Elijah through the quiet battles that no one else noticed. The long nights. The moments when memories felt heavier than words. The times when a simple presence beside him was enough. And Elijah had given Ghost something equally important. A place where he belonged. A person he trusted. A home. As they reached the center of the training field, Ghost stopped and looked around. For a moment, he seemed to remember every corner of the place. The old commands. The familiar sounds. The years they shared before everything changed. Elijah smiled softly. You remembered all of it. Ghost looked back at him with calm amber eyes. That evening, the collar was placed in a protected display case inside the K9 building. It was no longer a symbol of something lost. It became a reminder of something found again. The Marines who walked past it would not just see an old piece of equipment. They would see a story of trust, patience, and a connection strong enough to cross 3 years of silence. Because some promises are not written in official records. Some promises are carried quietly, one step at a time, until the day they finally lead someone home. The morning after Ghost returned to Camp Pendleton, Sergeant Elijah Carter arrived at the K9 facility before sunrise. The base was still quiet, wrapped in the soft blue light that came before the day fully began. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the ocean and the faint sound of waves beyond the training grounds. For years, Elijah had walked these same paths alone. Now, there were familiar footsteps beside him again. Ghost followed closely, his white coat moving gently with every step. The old K9 did not need a leash. He did not need instructions. He simply walked beside the man he had spent so long trying to find. Inside the facility, Captain Nathan Brooks had continued studying the message hidden inside Ghost's collar. But there was one detail that remained unanswered. The note mentioned that Ghost was carrying something important, something that needed to reach Elijah. Yet the message itself was incomplete. A part of the story was still missing. Elijah looked at the old collar displayed carefully on the table. There is something you are not telling us, Ghost, he whispered. The dog lifted his head as if he understood. Captain Brooks opened another archive folder from the K9 records. This time, it contained information from the weeks after Ghost disappeared. Most of the records were incomplete, but one detail appeared again and again. A small symbol marked on several documents. A symbol connected to a retired Marine who had worked with military dogs years earlier. His name was Thomas Reed. Thomas had been one of the few people who knew how deeply connected Elijah and Ghost were. He understood that their partnership was different. Not because of training, not because of commands, but because they trusted each other completely. Captain Brooks made a phone call. Within an hour, the team received a response. Thomas Reed agreed to visit the base. When he arrived, he was an older Marine with silver hair, calm eyes, and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime serving others. He carried no documents, only a small worn notebook. When he saw Ghost standing beside Elijah, his expression changed. I knew he would find his way back, Thomas said softly. Elijah looked surprised. You knew? Thomas nodded. Not exactly when, not exactly how, but I knew he would try. The room became quiet. Thomas opened the notebook. Inside were handwritten notes from 3 years earlier. Pages filled with observations about Ghost's behavior, his habits, and the things that made him unique. After the separation, Ghost stayed near the last place he remembered you, Thomas explained. He waited for days. He watched every person who came through. He was not confused. He was searching. Elijah lowered his eyes. Hearing. Those words was difficult. Not because they brought sadness, but because they showed him something he had never allowed himself to believe. Ghost had never forgotten him. Thomas continued. Eventually, someone helped him continue his journey. They recognized his collar and understood he belonged to someone. They kept him safe while trying to find where he came from. Elijah gently touched Ghost's head. The dog closed his eyes, enjoying the familiar gesture. Then why did it take 3 years? Elijah asked quietly. Thomas looked toward the window. Because sometimes the road home is longer than we expect. Those words stayed in the room. There was no dramatic answer. No perfect explanation. Only a simple truth. A loyal heart can travel through uncertainty and still remember where it belongs. Before leaving, Thomas handed Elijah one final page from the notebook. It was dated just a few weeks before Ghost returned. The writing was short. He still looks toward the west every morning. I think he knows someone is waiting there. Elijah read the sentence several times. Outside, Ghost stood near the open doorway, looking toward the California coastline, the same direction he had been looking for years. Elijah walked beside him and rested his hand on the K9's back. The Marine who once believed he had lost his partner forever finally understood something important. Ghost had never been lost. He had simply been following a path only his heart could remember. And now that he was home, the message he carried was ready to reveal the final promise that brought him back. The afternoon sun rested over Camp Pendleton, painting the training grounds with a warm golden glow. The ocean breeze moved gently across the base, carrying the familiar sounds of Marines completing their daily routines. But inside the K9 facility, Sergeant Elijah Carter stood quietly beside Ghost, holding the final page from Thomas Reed's old notebook. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Elijah could feel. He still looks toward the west every morning. I think he knows someone is waiting there. Elijah read the sentence again. For years, he had wondered if Ghost remembered him. Now he understood that the question was never whether Ghost remembered. The question was how much the old K9 had carried while trying to return. Captain Nathan Brooks placed the remaining documents on the table. There is one more thing, he said. Elijah looked up. What is it? Captain Brooks opened the last section of the file. Inside were notes about Ghost's journey after leaving the original location where he was separated from Elijah. The records were not complete, but they revealed something remarkable. Everywhere Ghost went, people noticed the same thing. He was not a lost dog searching randomly. He was a K9 following a memory. A retired couple near the coast had found him resting near a road one evening. They had given him food and water, but Ghost never stayed inside their home. Every morning, he walked to the same hill and looked toward the ocean. They wrote that he seemed peaceful, but determined, like he was waiting for the right moment to continue. Another family helped him later when they recognized his military collar. They searched for his records, hoping to find his original unit. But time had changed many things. Addresses changed. Records moved. People who knew Ghost's story had transferred or retired. Still, the old K9 continued forward. Elijah listened quietly as Captain Brooks explained each part of the journey. His eyes remained on Ghost. The dog was resting near his feet, unaware that every small detail of his past was finally being uncovered. He had so many chances to stay somewhere safe, Elijah said softly. Thomas Reed, who had stayed to help explain the story, nodded. Yes, but he did not choose the easiest place. He chose the place where his heart believed he belonged. The room became still. Those words reached Elijah in a way no report ever could. He had spent years believing that he was the one who lost Ghost. But now he saw the other side of the story. Ghost had lost him too. The difference was that Ghost never stopped searching. Later that evening, Elijah walked with Ghost through the quiet side of the base. The training fields were almost empty. The sky slowly changed from blue to shades of orange and purple. Ghost moved beside him, with the same steady rhythm he had always carried. They stopped near the old obstacle course where they had trained together years before. Elijah remembered the young K9 who once struggled to trust unfamiliar people. He remembered sitting beside him after difficult training days, speaking softly until Ghost learned that he was safe. Looking back, Elijah realized they had both needed the same thing. They both needed someone who would stay. You know, Elijah said quietly, I thought I was the one who saved you. Ghost looked up. Elijah smiled. But maybe you saved me too. The dog gently leaned against his leg. A small gesture. A familiar gesture. But after everything they had been through, it felt like a message without words. As evening settled over Camp Pendleton, Elijah returned to the K9 facility with Ghost beside him. The old collar was no longer just an artifact from the past. It represented patience, trust, and a promise that survived every mile between them. Yet there was still one final question waiting. Everyone now knew how Ghost found his way back, but no one knew the full meaning behind the message hidden inside his collar. Why was it written? Who was it truly meant for? And what promise had Ghost carried across 3 years of silence? Elijah looked at the white German shepherd resting beside him and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not uncertainty, not sadness, hope, because sometimes the greatest stories are not about what was lost. They are about what was carried until the right moment arrived. The next morning arrived quietly over Camp Pendleton, California. A thin layer of mist rested above the training fields, and the first light of day slowly touched the rows of buildings, the American flags, and the long paths where Marines had walked for generations. Sergeant Elijah Carter stood outside the K-9 facility with Ghost beside him, watching the sunrise. For the first time in years, the morning did not feel like a reminder of something missing. It felt like a beginning. But inside the facility, one final mystery remained. The message inside Ghost's collar was not just a simple note. It was a promise, and everyone wanted to understand who that promise was truly meant for. Captain Nathan Brooks gathered Elijah, Thomas Reed, and a small group of K-9 staff around the old records table. The collar rested in the center, carefully protected beneath a soft cloth. The room was quiet as Captain Brooks opened the final documents connected to Ghost's return. "There is something we missed," he said. Elijah looked at him. "What do you mean?" Captain Brooks turned the page. The message was not written after Ghost disappeared. It was written before. The words changed the atmosphere in the room. Elijah looked toward the collar again. A message prepared before the separation. A promise made before anyone knew how long the journey would become. Thomas Reed took a slow breath. "I always wondered if this day would come." Elijah turned toward him. "You knew about the message?" Thomas nodded. "I knew someone wanted Ghost to carry something important, but I never knew if he would make it back." He opened his old notebook again and found a page he had kept hidden among his personal records. The handwriting was from another Marine who had worked closely with the K-9 unit. His name was Daniel Walker. Daniel had been one of the people who understood the connection between Elijah and Ghost better than anyone. He had seen the way the two worked together, not just as a handler in a K-9, but as partners who trusted each other completely. Daniel wrote this before he left the unit. Thomas explained. He believed some promises needed a witness. Elijah listened carefully as Thomas read the words. "A good partner does not measure distance. A good partner does not count days. A good partner remembers the way home." The room became silent. Outside, the sound of Marines training continued, but inside that small office, time seemed to slow. Elijah looked down at Ghost. The white German shepherd sat calmly beside him, his eyes focused on the people around him. The dog that had carried a message for 3 years was now finally surrounded by the people who understood it. Captain Brooks carefully placed the note beside the collar. "There is one more thing," he said. He turned the old metal tag over. On the back was a small engraving that had faded with time. It was a short phrase, "Always return." Elijah traced the words gently with his finger. Those 2 words carried everything. The long search, the quiet waiting, the belief that something lost could still find its way home. Later that afternoon, Elijah brought Ghost back to the training field. The same field where they had first learned each other's rhythm. The same place where trust was built one small moment at a time. Younger Marines watched from a distance as the older K-9 walked beside the man who had never stopped remembering him. They saw a reunion, but Elijah felt something deeper. He felt forgiveness. Not from Ghost. The dog had never been angry. The forgiveness came from himself. For years, Elijah had carried the belief that he should have done more. He believed the separation was a failure he had to live with. But Ghost showed him something different. Love does not disappear when circumstances change. Loyalty does not fade when time passes. Sometimes, it simply waits quietly until 2 paths meet again. As the sun lowered over the Pacific horizon, Elijah sat on the grass with Ghost beside him. The K-9 rested his head near Elijah's hand, peaceful and content. The old collar remained safe inside the facility, but its message was no longer a mystery. It was a reminder that some bonds are stronger than distance. Some promises survive without words. And sometimes, the smallest footsteps are the ones that lead us back to where we belong. The days that followed Ghost's return felt different at Camp Pendleton. Nothing about the base itself had changed. The same morning routines continued. Marines still crossed the training grounds before sunrise. The same flags moved gently in the California breeze. The same ocean waves carried their quiet rhythm beyond the base. But for Sergeant Elijah Carter, everything felt new. A place that once carried memories of loss now carried a sense of peace. Each morning, he walked with Ghost beside him. The white German shepherd moved with the same calm confidence he had always carried, as if 3 years had only been a long night and not a missing chapter of their lives. Other Marines began to notice something special about the pair. The younger members of the K-9 unit watched carefully, learning from the connection between them. They expected to see commands and discipline. Instead, they saw patience. They saw trust. They saw two partners who understood each other without needing many words. One afternoon, Elijah returned to the old training field where Ghost and he had spent countless hours together. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass. The air smelled of salt from the Pacific, and the earth warmed by the afternoon light. Ghost walked slowly beside him, stopping occasionally to look around. It was as if the K9 was collecting every familiar detail again. The sounds, the scents, the feeling of being home. Elijah sat beneath a large tree near the edge of the field. Ghost settled beside him, resting his head near Elijah's boots. For a while, neither of them moved. They simply listened to the quiet. "You know," Elijah said softly, "I used to think I was waiting for you." Ghost lifted his eyes toward him. Elijah smiled gently. "But maybe we were both waiting." The Marine looked across the field. He thought about all the years before. The moments when he questioned whether some promises were too difficult to keep. The times when he wondered if hope was something he should let go of. But Ghost's return had taught him something important. Hope does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it travels slowly. Sometimes it crosses unknown roads. Sometimes it appears when everyone has already stopped looking. A few days later, the K9 facility held a small gathering to honor Ghost's return. There were no grand speeches. No celebration meant for attention. It was simply a moment for the people who knew the story to stand together and recognize what had happened. Captain Nathan Brooks placed Ghost's old collar inside a display case near the entrance of the facility. The message remained visible. "Always return." Those words became more than a memory. They became a reminder for every Marine who passed through those doors. A reminder that loyalty was not about never being separated. Loyalty was about never forgetting the way back. Thomas Reed stood beside Elijah as they watched younger Marines look at the display. "Some stories are written in records," Thomas said. "Others are written in the hearts of the people who live them." Elijah nodded. He looked toward Ghost, who was resting peacefully nearby. The old K9 no longer needed to prove anything. He had already shown the world what loyalty looked like. Not through strength, not through noise, but through patience, trust, and an unbreakable connection. As the evening arrived, Elijah walked Ghost back across the base one final time that day. The lights along the pathways slowly turned on. The sound of the ocean grew softer in the distance. A Marine and his K9 walked side by side beneath the fading California sky. 3 years of separation had changed many things. They were both older. They both carried memories that could never be erased. But the most important thing remained the same. They still knew each other. They still trusted each other. They were still home. And sometimes, the greatest miracles are not the ones that happen in a single moment. Sometimes, they are the quiet miracles that take years to arrive, carried by a loyal heart that never stopped believing.